At 36, the highest paid and most desired woman on the planet did something that made Hollywood bosses' hearts skip a beat. She simply stood up, walked out of the studio, and vanished for 50 years. While other actresses clung to fame, popped pills, and begged for roles, Greta Garbo told multi-million-dollar contracts to go to hell. She didn't even show up to collect her Oscar, pulled her hat down over her eyes, and became New York's most expensive ghost. The world thought she faded away in empty mansions after a flop film. But in truth, it was the most brilliant and ruthless manipulation in showbiz history. Today, we'll dissect the psychology of the first anti-star and uncover the chilling truth. In a world where everything is for sale, absolute power belongs only to those who need nothing from you. You're not here for another biographical rundown of the Swedish Sphinx. You're here to grasp the mechanics of the impossible. How, in an era when the studio system controlled every breath an actor took, did one woman make the massive MGM corporation dance to her tune? Here, we talk not about myths, but the people behind them. If this story resonates with you, support the video with a like and subscribe to the channel. And if I'm wrong, if you disagree, or see this story differently, write about it in the comments. Stories come alive in debate. Act 1. Trial by Sound. How her voice amplified the myth. But before we reach the finale, let's rewind to the moment everyone expected her first fall. The moment when the system was sure. The Garbo myth was about to crumble, faced with the mundane reality of physics. In the late 20s, Hollywood was a disaster zone. The technological revolution, sound cinema, decapitated silent film royalty with the ruthlessness of a French guillotine. Great actors, whose faces had moved audiences to tears for years, suddenly opened their mouths, and the magic vanished. Turns out, the dashing John Gilbert had a high, almost comical voice. Turns out, goddesses lisped. Reality rudely barged into the realm of fantasy, and audiences, hearing a real person instead of a celestial image, turned away in disappointment. MGM was in a panic. Their crown jewel, Greta Garbo, was the Sphinx, and sphinxes don't talk. Her entire image built on mystery, on what was left unsaid, on what happened behind her eyes, not what spilled from her lips. Plus, she had a heavy, languid Swedish accent. Producers Louis Mayer and Irving Thalberg delayed the inevitable as long as they could. They feared that once Garbo spoke, she'd become just a Swede, one of thousands of immigrants, and her divine glow would fade. Everyone expected sound to kill the mystery, but in reality, sound became her greatest weapon. When Anna Christie hit screens in 1930, MGM's ad campaign was just 2 words, printed in giant letters on posters: Garbo talks. It sounded less like a movie invitation and more like a proclamation of Christ's return. The studio went all in, selling the mere fact of her voice as an attraction. And then the moment came. Garbo entered the frame, tired, life-worn, in a cheap coat. She sat at a table in a dockside bar, leaned heavily on it, and delivered her first line. The world held its breath. She said, "Gimme a whiskey, ginger ale on the side, and don't be stingy, baby." This wasn't the voice of just a Swede. It was a low, vibrating contralto, a voice that sounded like it had traveled through thousands of years, hundreds of beds, and millions of smoked cigarettes. The accent didn't make her funny or provincial. It made her exotic, even more alien and unreachable. Why did it work where others failed? Most silent film stars, handed a microphone, tried to act with their voices as they did with their faces, with excessive theatricality. They aimed to please, to be understood. Garbo did the exact opposite. She used sound not for communication, but to create even more distance. Her voice was detached, almost lazy. She didn't throw lines at her co-star. She dropped them, as if doing a favor. This created a paradoxical effect of intimacy. The audience in the dark theater felt that this low voice spoke directly into their heads, bypassing the screen. The sound, which was supposed to expose her as an ordinary person, instead added physical density and dangerous sexuality to her image. In this moment lies the first lesson of Garbo's power. She didn't adapt to the new technology. She made the technology amplify her existing myth. She showed that mystery isn't the absence of information, silence, but a way of presenting information. You can speak and still remain completely closed off. You can be in plain sight and still be invisible. This success gave her more than just a contract extension. It gave her leverage no one else had. If Garbo Talks brings in millions, then Garbo can dictate when and what she will say. And while Hollywood celebrated the birth of a new sound superstar, Garbo herself began her quiet, methodical war against the very structure that created her. Act 2, MGM's Fatal Mistake and the Radical Rejection. The world thought she won because she adapted. In truth, she won because she refused to play the good girl game. To grasp the radical nature of her next move, we need to see how she began to choke the studio machine hungry for her flesh. We're nearing the point of no return. The moment often labeled in film history books as a tragic end or sudden breakdown. But if we view the facts through the lens that refusal is power, then 1941 stops looking like a defeat. It becomes the greatest strategic maneuver in showbiz history. By the early 40s, Greta Garbo wasn't just a star. She was an economic entity, a state within the state of MGM. But the system has one trait. It loathes stasis. It always demands growth, novelty, and most importantly, complete submission to trends. And the trend had shifted. America stood on the brink of war. Tension hung in the air, and producers believed audiences no longer wanted to see suffering European aristocrats dying of tuberculosis or throwing themselves under trains. They wanted to laugh. They wanted to see their girl. And here, MGM made a fatal mistake. They decided to fix what wasn't broken. They aimed to Americanize the Sphinx. The result of this strategic blunder was the film Two-Faced Woman. The studio deliberately tried to tear down the pedestal Garbo stood on, to bring her down to the level of the ordinary viewer. The idea seemed genius to them. Let's take the coldest, most unreachable woman in the world and make her play an ordinary skier pretending to be her own twin sister, a scandalous socialite, to keep her husband. On paper, it was a light comedy. On screen, it looked like an act of vandalism. In one scene, Garbo dances the chic chick, a trendy Latin dance of the time. Watch this scene today. There's something deeply unnatural, almost painful about it. It's not just bad choreography. It's a moment of humiliation. A goddess forced to clown around. A woman whose gaze could stop a heart, made to pander to the camera, begging for audience laughter. The studio broke an unspoken contract with the audience. Viewers didn't go to Garbo Films to see themselves in her. They went to see something otherworldly. By turning her into just another woman, MGM destroyed the essence of her allure. Critics were ruthless. Time magazine called the film a shocking misfire, and audiences left theaters bewildered. The Catholic Church even condemned the picture for immorality, which was the final nail in the coffin. The industry's expectation was standard. After a flop, a star should repent. She should give a series of interviews, explain that the experiment failed, maybe change agents, choose a safe script, return to her tragic heroine role, and rebuild her status through hard work. It was the standard cycle: rise, fall, redemption, comeback. Hollywood is a machine that feeds on this cycle. The studio was already preparing a new project for her, The Girl from Leningrad, hoping Garbo, scared by the failure, would be more agreeable. But Garbo did something neither Meyer nor the press could fathom. She didn't apologize. She didn't try to win back the public's love. She simply said, "I'm going home." And it wasn't a tantrum. It wasn't a momentary impulse. This decision held the icy logic of someone who understood the rules of the game better than those who created it. Garbo realized a critical truth. Her myth wouldn't survive normalization. If she stayed and started fighting for box office success with mediocre roles, she'd become a parody of herself. She'd become Gloria Swanson from Sunset Boulevard, a decade before that film was made. A fading icon desperately trying to prove she's still great. In a system that sells the whole person, the only way to preserve oneself was to pull the product from the market. Her departure at 36 wasn't a retreat of the defeated. It was a rage quit of a player who had beaten the game, seen the new levels were dull and degrading, and yanked the plug. It's crucial to understand the context. She didn't leave because she was kicked out. She was wanted. She was offered contracts. The world was ready to give her a second, third, 10th chance. But she denied the world that opportunity. It was a radical act of sovereignty. In Hollywood, where an actor's self-worth is directly tied to an agent's call, a newspaper review, a place in the credits, Garbo demonstrated absolute self-sufficiency. By refusing to fix the impression left by two-faced woman, she froze her image in time. Leaving cinema in 1941, she remained forever in the collective memory as young, beautiful, and enigmatic. She didn't let the public see her age on screen, play mothers or grandmothers, or take supporting roles for a paycheck. Imagine the level of willpower needed for this. Imagine the drug of fame injected into her veins for a decade and a half. Adoration of millions, royal paychecks, power over minds. And imagine the strength needed to voluntarily walk away from it. Most stars don't leave. They're carried out, or shown the door when they stop being profitable. Garbo walked out the front door, leaving everyone slack-jawed. She created a scarcity that couldn't be filled. This decision became the foundation of her immortality. Had she made 10 more films, even good ones, she'd be just one of the great actresses of the golden age, like Bette Davis or Joan Crawford. But leaving like that, she entered another category. She became a ghost. She became an obsession. For years, people thought it was a temporary pause. The studio waited. Directors waited. Even Hitchcock tried to bring her back. But every time she was offered a script, she found a reason to refuse. At first, it seemed like a whim, then a quirk, and finally, it became clear. It was a strategy. The longer she stayed silent, the louder that silence became. Garbo's refusal proved, power is the ability to say no when everyone around demands yes. She didn't just leave the movies. She refused to participate in the attention economy. While other stars hired publicists to get their names in the papers, Garbo spent her efforts making her name disappear, and ironically, this made her the most coveted prey for paparazzi. Here we see a paradox modern marketers can't resolve. Today's culture teaches us, be everywhere, be accessible, create content 24/7, or you'll be forgotten. Garbo proved the opposite. Become unavailable, and you'll be remembered forever. Because human nature is such that we value most what we can't have. Many analysts of the time considered her departure cowardice. They said she was scared, she couldn't adapt. What a monstrous mistake. To stay in Hollywood and play by its rules requires flexibility. To leave Hollywood when you're at the top and never look back requires steel. Her failure with Two-Faced Woman became the perfect alibi for escape. Perhaps subconsciously, she wanted that failure. Maybe she needed a reason to break the chains that were growing heavier. We'll never know for sure because she left no diaries or confessions. But the result speaks for itself. In 1941, Greta Garbo stopped being an actress and became a professional myth. She transitioned from public property to private ownership of herself. But to fully appreciate the scale of this war for personal boundaries, we need to understand the monster she fought all those years. Her departure wasn't spontaneous. It was the culmination of a years-long guerrilla war with the most powerful dream-making machine in human history. And in this war, she used tactics that still seem revolutionary today. Act 3. The War with Mayer and the Studio System. To grasp the magnitude of what Garbo achieved, you first need to understand where she stood. We often view the golden age of Hollywood through rose-tinted glasses. Glamour, limousines, camera flashes. But strip away that veneer, and you're left with a harsh, almost totalitarian structure. The studio system of the 20s and 30s wasn't just a business. It was a human processing plant. Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, ruled by the iron Louis Mayer, sat at the top of this food chain. Mayer didn't just hire actors. He owned them. The infamous 7-year slave contracts of the time gave studios the right to decide everything for an actor. Which films to star in, whom to sleep with, whom to marry, how to dress, and what to say to reporters. Refusing a role meant the contract paused. The downtime simply added to the end, effectively making the servitude indefinite. Actors were, in Hitchcock's famous words, cattle. Expensive, well-groomed, but powerless cattle. They were pumped with pills to work 18-hour days and sleeping pills to rest. Their biographies were rewritten from scratch. Their names were changed. Into this grinder stepped a 19-year-old Swede who barely spoke English. The system's expectation was standard. The girl would be grateful. She'd do as told, smile at investors at banquets, and kiss Mayer's ring. In reality, Garbo turned out to be the most inconvenient, ungrateful, and dangerous asset MGM ever held. The war began almost immediately. The story of Garbo versus Mayer is a textbook on negotiating from a position of weakness that suddenly turns into strength. When Garbo first arrived in America, she earned $400 a week. Not bad for an immigrant, but peanuts for a star bringing in millions for the studio. After her initial successes, Garbo did what other actresses feared to even imagine. She demanded a renegotiation of her contract. Mayer was furious. He was used to stars begging for advances, pleading for roles, or crying in his office. Mayer was a master manipulator. He could play the kind father, could cry on command, could threaten career destruction. But with Garbo, all his tricks misfired. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't try to persuade him. She used a tactic you might call the Swedish gambit. When refused a raise to $5,000 a week, she simply said her famous line, "I think I'll go back to Sweden." And she meant it. She sat in her hotel room, ignoring calls and packing her bags. For Mayer, it was a nightmare. He couldn't intimidate someone genuinely ready to lose everything. Garbo had no ties in Hollywood, no mortgage on a mansion, no thirst for the high life. Her willingness to walk away from Hollywood was absolute, and that made her invincible. The system thrives on fear of losing status. If someone doesn't fear losing status, the system has no leverage. For 7 months, Garbo held her ground. For 7 months, MGM bled money while their top star went on strike. Eventually, Mayer caved. He didn't just give her $5,000. By the end of her career, she earned an astronomical $270,000 per film, more than any male actor of the time. She forced a patriarchal system where women were beautiful decor to pay her like a queen. But money was only one side of this war. Far more important was the battle for control over the production process. MGM built its business on the availability of stars. The press was Hollywood's lifeblood. Columnists Hedda Hopper and Luella Parsons wielded the power to destroy careers with a single column. All stars were obliged to feed them, give exclusives, let photographers into their bedrooms, talk about their romances. Garbo refused it all. Her contracts included clauses that seemed insane. She refused to entertain visitors on set. No investors, no journalists, no studio friends. When Garbo was filming, the set turned into a bunker. She demanded black screens around the camera, creating a corridor of impenetrability. Only the cameraman and director could see her. Even the lighting crew and stagehands weren't allowed to watch her perform. This behavior was dubbed prima donna strangeness, a star's whim. But look deeper. It wasn't a whim. It was protection of her working tool. Garbo understood what the studio bosses didn't. Her magic was fragile. It worked on nuances, micro-expressions, inner concentration. The presence of gawking onlookers chewing gum shattered that concentration. By shielding herself with black screens, she wasn't hiding. She was creating sterile laboratory conditions for her craft. The studio hated it. The marketing department tore their hair out. How do you sell a star who doesn't give interviews? How do you maintain interest without gossip? And here lies the main paradox of Garbo and MGM's relationship. The studio actively sold her image as the enigma, the Sphinx, the mysterious woman. They printed posters, fueled the mystique, but they loathed the fact that this mystery was real. The system loves a controlled mystery. The system likes it when PR people invent a legend, and the actor dutifully plays along, winking at the producer. With Garbo, the legend was reality. She genuinely didn't want to see anyone. Mayer was trapped. He made millions off her elusiveness. But as a manager, he went mad from his inability to control her. Every time filming ended, Garbo simply vanished. She didn't attend her own film premieres. Imagine that today. Tom Cruise shoots Mission Impossible and skips the red carpet. It's unthinkable. It's a breach of all business laws. Garbo did it regularly. When asked why she didn't attend the premiere of her triumphant film Camille, she replied, "Why should I? I was there when we filmed it." This line perfectly illustrates the chasm between Garbo and the industry. For the industry, a movie is a product to be sold. The premiere is part of the packaging. For Garbo, a movie is an act of creation that ends with cut. Everything that follows, ticket sales, reviews, applause, has nothing to do with her. She separated the labor from the consumption of its fruits. Mayer tried to use her origins against her. They threatened visa issues, hinted at deportation. But Garbo knew her worth. She knew that without her, MGM's profits would plummet. She became too big to fail. This constant tension between the studio's desire to exploit her image and her fierce resistance to any exploitation off-screen created a unique precedent. She proved that talent could dictate terms to capital if the talent had nerves of steel. She wasn't a victim of the system like Judy Garland or Marilyn Monroe, whom the system chewed up and spat out. Garbo was a virus in the system. She used MGM's resources, the best costumes, the best lighting, the best cameramen. She insisted on being shot only by William Daniels to create art, but she didn't let the system consume her identity. In the end, MGM never figured out how to manage her. They just accepted that they had a unicorn in their zoo, one that would butt heads if approached too closely. They kept paying, and she kept silent. But this war left its mark. The constant battle for personal space, the need to be on guard 24/7, was exhausting. By 1941, Garbo wasn't just tired of playing roles in movies. She was tired of playing the role of Greta Garbo in Mayer's office. Her departure wasn't just a refusal of acting. It was a final severance from a reality where she owed anyone anything. Act 4. The anti-star psychology and the blank face effect. Beating the studio financially was one thing. Beating public expectations was another. Garbo had to do the impossible, flip the very idea of a star. In a world where fan love was the main currency, she chose emotional bankruptcy and built an empire on ice. This leads us to the most intriguing part of her strategy, the psychology of the anti-star. In today's marketing world, there's a golden rule: be yourself. Social media has trained us to expect celebrities to be accessible. We want to see what they eat for breakfast, how they look without makeup, how they walk their dog. We demand relatability, the chance to see ourselves in our idols, the illusion of closeness, the illusion of friendship. That's the fuel of today's attention economy. Greta Garbo would have destroyed this world with a single raised eyebrow. She built the most successful career in film history on the exact opposite principle. She became the first anti-star. Her strategy was based on a radical, almost insulting idea. I'm not your friend, I'm not like you, and I don't want you to like me. This went against everything Hollywood taught. Before Garbo, the model was Mary Pickford, America's sweetheart, the cute girl with golden curls you wanted to adopt or marry. Audiences paid for warmth. Garbo began selling cold, Arctic, absolute cold. The psychology of this phenomenon is fascinating. When someone desperately tries to please you, looking into your eyes for approval, your instinctive reaction is condescension. You feel power over them. But when someone looks right through you, showing complete indifference to your existence, it stings. It creates a challenge. It breeds obsession. Garbo understood. Distance creates gravity. Look at her on-screen persona. She almost never plays happy women. She doesn't flash a 32-tooth smile. In fact, the studio forbade her from smiling broadly, considering it vulgar. Her characters are always somewhere else, even if physically in a man's arms. In love scenes, she often looks not passionate, but tired. She allows herself to be loved, condescends to love, but never loses control. For the audience, especially men, it was hypnotic. It was a fantasy of conquering the unconquerable. It was a challenge. Can you melt this ice? If Marilyn Monroe later sold vulnerability and accessibility, Garbo sold invulnerability. But the genius of her anti-stardom is best seen not in film plots, but in her acting technique. She invented what could be called the blank face effect. The most famous example is the finale of Queen Christina. It's a textbook moment studied in film schools everywhere. Her character, the Swedish queen, abdicates the throne for love, but her lover dies. In the final scene, Garbo stands at the ship's bow, wind in her face, and the camera slowly, painfully slowly, zooms in on her. Legend has it the director struggled to get the right expression from her. "Show grief," he said. It came out too theatrical. "Show hope." Too fake. Finally, Mamoulian gave her a brilliant piece of advice. "Don't act. Make your face a blank sheet of paper. Think of nothing." And she did it. For several minutes on screen, we see a face with no specific emotion. It's completely still. And what happens in the theater? Every viewer projects their own emotions onto that blank face. Some see an abyss of despair in her eyes. Others see the resolve to start anew. Some see the wisdom of the ages. She became a mirror. By not giving the audience a specific emotion, she forced them to work, to invest their own soul into her image. This is the pinnacle of audience interaction. She didn't spoon-feed emotions to the viewer. She created a vacuum the viewer had to fill themselves. That's why her face was called a landscape. You could wander through it with your eyes, finding new details that might not even be there. Roland Barthes, in his famous essay, wrote, "Garbo's face is an idea. It wasn't a portrait of a specific woman. It was an icon, a deity's mask. And like any deity, it had to be a little frightening and infinitely distant." In real life, she carried this blank sheet technique into her relationship with the public. The phrase attributed to her, "I want to be alone," is actually a distortion. In Grand Hotel, she says, "I want to be let alone." The difference is huge. The first is a state of loneliness. The second is a demand for sovereignty. Garbo turned her life into a fortress. She wore men's trousers and low-heeled shoes when everyone else wore dresses and stilettos. She pulled hats down over her eyes. She wore dark glasses. The paradox she, perhaps unconsciously, exploited was this: the more you hide, the more people look at you. If she walked around New York smiling, signing autographs, she'd become a familiar part of the scenery within a week. But who's the woman running from the camera, covering her face with her hand? That's prey. That's a sensation. Paparazzi hunted for decades for a single shot of the real Garbo. Every blurry frame of her just walking down the street was worth thousands of dollars. She created a scarcity of herself. In economics, it's the law of supply and demand. Cut supply to zero, and the price skyrockets. She didn't give interviews because she knew any word breaks the magic. If a goddess starts talking about the weather or what brand of shampoo she uses, she stops being a goddess. Silence allowed people to attribute deep intelligence, incredible spirituality, and secret knowledge to her. Who knows what she's silent about? Maybe she's foolish. Or maybe she's discovered the universe's secret. As long as she's silent, both options are possible. But the public always chooses the latter. This makes Garbo not just an actress, but the architect of her own myth. She understood that identification, she's just like me, is cheap and short-lived. But reverence, she's a higher being, is eternal. She refused to be an object of consumption. She refused to be a product on a shelf you could handle. She placed herself behind bulletproof glass. You can look, but you can't touch. And certainly you can't own. This approach created unique loyalty. Garbo's fans didn't just love her, they worshipped her like a cult. And when the temple closed its doors in 1941, the congregation didn't disperse. They stayed waiting at the entrance. But the most amazing thing about Garbo's story isn't how she acted or how she left. The most amazing thing is what happened after. Half a century of life after the career's death. This period, which usually becomes a time of oblivion, became a time of legend crystallization for her. She proved you could be the most famous woman in the world while just being a pedestrian in a coat. Act 5. Half a century of silence. Life in New York and snubbing the Oscar. The hardest part of leaving isn't when the door closes. It's resisting the urge to knock again when silence falls. Showbiz history is littered with great comebacks that ended in disaster. Stars can't handle silence. They crave the spotlight. The proof they're still adored. Frank Sinatra left and returned. Cher did the same. It's an addiction stronger than heroin. Greta Garbo spent 49 years as a former actress, nearly half a century, 3 times longer than her film career. And in all those years, she never broke her vow of silence. She didn't hide in a desert bunker or on a private island. She lived in the heart of the world. New York City, in a 7-room apartment on 52nd Street, overlooking the East River. Surrounded by millions. Here, among skyscrapers and crowds, she performed her final and longest act, transforming from a living woman into an urban legend. Many biographers paint this time as a tragedy of loneliness. They conjure up a crazy old lady locked in 4 walls. It's a convenient lie to sell. The truth was far more intriguing and, in our story's context, far more powerful. Garbo wasn't hiding under the bed. She became the Garbo pedestrian. She strolled Manhattan daily. Long coat, hat pulled low, sensible shoes. She browsed antique shops, bought vegetables, window shopped. She lived like a wealthy, independent European rentier who valued art. Her painting collection, including Renoir, was worth millions, and a tight circle of friends. But to New York, she was like a yeti. Garbo Watch became a national sport. People bragged, "I saw her on Madison Avenue today. She was buying apples." Think about the absurdity. The century's most famous woman walks among people, aiming to be nobody. Yet that very goal made her a magnet. If she'd worn an evening gown to the Metropolitan Opera, it would be society news for a day. But a ghost in a gray coat, gliding through streets, stirred imaginations for decades. She never tried to return to the industry, though it begged her to. In the late 40s, they offered her staggering fees. Hitchcock wrote scripts for her. Tennessee Williams dreamed of her in his plays. Orson Welles wanted to work with her. She turned them all down. Sometimes she flirted with the idea, read scripts, even tried on makeup, but always pulled the emergency brake at the last moment. Why? Because Garbo was a perfectionist to her core. She understood a harsh truth that 99% of actors refuse to accept. The camera is no friend. It's an X-ray. She knew her face was changing. Gravity and age take their toll. She didn't want the world comparing the Garbo with a middle-aged woman. She chose to leave the legend untarnished by the reality of aging. It was an act of incredible discipline. She sacrificed her ego, the desire to act, to be the center of attention, to preserve her myth. She sealed herself in eternity. But her ultimate power move came in '54. The Academy wanted to give her an honorary Oscar for her outstanding contribution to cinema. For a star, it's usually a moment of triumph, a chance to wear the finest dress, take the stage, tear up, thank mom, agent, and God, and bask in applause. It's validation. You love me, I exist. Garbo didn't show. She didn't even record a video message. Nancy Kelly picked up the statue. Garbo likely just sipped tea in her apartment or strolled in the park. This gesture was a complete humiliation for the system. Hollywood said, "We want to honor you." And Garbo replied, "I don't care." She showed their golden statues, their recognition, their hierarchy held no power over her. She didn't need their approval. In her final years, the hunt for her turned vicious. Paparazzo Ted Layson stalked her for over 10 years, like a maniac. He camped outside her building to capture that shot, the shot of an old, wrinkled woman, and he got it. In 1990, shortly before her death. The world saw those photos, but a miracle happened. They didn't shatter the myth. Instead, the contrast between the divine face on screen and the worn face of an elderly woman only amplified the tragedy and grandeur of her story. She didn't undergo plastic surgery to cheat time. She didn't dye her hair absurd colors. She aged honestly, but privately. She died on Easter Sunday, 1990. She was 84. After her death, relatives and auction houses began sorting through her belongings, and another detail emerged. Garbo kept nothing. She didn't create an archive for posterity. She didn't write memoirs, though publishers offered her blank checks with any amount she wanted. "I have nothing to say," she replied. Or more bluntly, "My life is my business." She didn't want to justify herself. She didn't want to explain why she left, whom she loved, whether she was happy. She took all her secrets to the grave. In an era where every sneeze is documented, where stars write autobiographies at 20, Garbo's silence seems alien. She guarded her solitude not as a punishment, but as a treasure. She proved that in a system wanting to buy you whole, your body, your voice, your thoughts, your past, the only territory of freedom is inside you, behind a closed door, and the key to that door should be yours alone. Garbo left undefeated. She outplayed MGM, outplayed the press, and outplayed time. She left us with questions, not answers. And that's why we're talking about her in 2025, while the names of her more compliant and open contemporaries have long faded from memory. She was right. Reality always loses to imagination. And to remain in imagination forever, you must remove reality from the stage in time. So what can we, living in a world of total transparency, learn from this icy strategy? We began this journey with the image of a poor little rich girl, trapped in the golden cage of her fame and fears. We sought tragedy, but we found something entirely different. We found a manual on absolute power. Greta Garbo taught us a lesson that resonates sharper in 2025 than ever before. We live in an era of radical transparency. Social media, streaming, influencer culture, all scream at us. Show yourself. Turn your soul inside out. If you're not in the feed, you don't exist. We willingly become commodities, selling our privacy for likes that can't even be cashed in. Garbo proved this model is a fool's trap. She showed that true value is created not by presence, but by absence. In a world of noise, silence becomes the most precious sound. In a world of accessibility, a closed door becomes the most coveted object. She wasn't a victim of her temperament. She was a brilliant strategist who understood the main rule of playing with the devil. You can sell him your talent, you can sell him your face, but never, under any circumstances, should you sell him the keys to your home. She didn't leave because she broke. She left because she won. She took her winnings off the table and walked out of the casino while others kept betting, hoping to win back. She preserved herself. And in a system that grinds human destinies into fodder for the crowd's entertainment, preserving oneself is the ultimate act of heroism. Garbo left us not just films, she left us a void shaped like a woman, and we still try to fill that void with our fantasies. She won immortality simply by saying, no. Garbo chose the ghost strategy, disappear to win. But in Hollywood's history, there was a man who chose the terrorist strategy. He hated fame as much as Garbo did, but instead of quietly leaving, he stayed. He stayed to turn producers' lives into hell, disrupt shoots, send Native Americans to accept his Oscars, and openly scorn those who paid him millions. Garbo killed with silence. He killed with chaos. Whose strategy proved more effective in the long run? Want to discover the art of sabotage in the story of Marlon Brando? Write to me, and I'll tell you that tale.